Okay, so now that we've wrapped up compositing our stadium, we can turn right around and reuse our stadium comp asset to help us composite the audience. So I'm going to drop a new instance of our stadium comp asset into our scene, so stadium comp up from underneath digital assets. And I'm going to rename this to audience base, since it's going to provide the base for all the lighting for the audience. And the first thing I'm going to do is change out all of our passes for the appropriate audience passes. So bleachers top diffuse, so let's grab shot 3, our audience. It's going to take a while, there's a lot of files in that folder. And we want our bleachers top diffuse. I'm going to Control C to copy that, paste into the shadow. Actually, we didn't need to switch out our shadow, because it's the same shadow as last time, so I'm going to take our shadow back to being the bleachers top shadow for shot 3. Bleachers bounce, I do want to paste that into. Jump up and grab our bleachers bounce diffuse for shot 3 for the audience. Main spotlights for the diffuse, I do want to paste into. Jump up and grab our audience main spots diffuse. And we can see those down there. And also grab the audience main spots specular. And you can see from our audience folder the only other lights we need to bring in are our rim lights, diffuse and specular. So I'm going to push backtick to bring up our browser and bring in both our rim lights, diffuse and specular. And we've seen for diffuse and specular we're going to screen those together. So I'm going to right click on the output of diffuse, create a new screen comp, enter to drop that in and wire in our specular into the screen. And let's call this screen rim lights. And I do want to make sure that we are not screening the alpha, so I'm going to uncheck that from the mask tab. So now that we've got those lights screened, we can add them to our existing lights. So I'm going to right click on the output of audience base, create a new add comp, enter to drop that into our network and wire our screen rim lights into the second input and rename this to add rim lights. And with that, that's actually all the work we need to do for our audience asset, so we can now turn around and collapse this down and create our audience asset. So I'm going to grab all of these nodes, I'm going to Shift C to collapse these. I'm going to rename this to audience comp. I do want to jump inside and make sure that indeed our render flag is set on that final add comp. So I'm going to jump back up. Right click on our audience comp subnet and choose to create a digital asset. I'm going to give this a name of audience comp with the label audience comp, and again I'm going to put this into our compositing.otl file. So if we accept, we'll bring up the type properties. The first thing I want to do is promote up all of our type properties that came from our stadium. So I'm going to jump into our audience comp, and we got our audience base. I want to grab all 3 of the folders from audience base. Before I do, I want to ensure that prefix, linked parameter, name and label are unchecked. So I'm going to grab bleachers top, bleachers bounce and main spotlights by shift left clicking to grab those. I'm going to promote them over into our folder. I do want to create some separators, so I have a separator between the files and the parameters for both bleachers top and main spotlights. Bleachers bounce only has 2 parameters, so I'm not worried about that. And I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to place this before our main spotlights folder, and I'm going to rename this to rim lights. And under this folder we're going to create file parameters for our diffuse and specular sequences, and then we're going to create overall diffuse and specular intensity parameters. So let's jump inside our asset, let's jump up to our diffuse image, right click and export parameter to type properties. I'm going to call this rim light diff file. I'll give it the label diffuse sequence. And I'm going to drop that into our rim lights folder. I'm going to do the same on the specular file, so right click, export parameter to type properties. I'll give this a name of rim light spec file and a label of specular sequence. And drop that into our rim lights folder. I'll then go ahead and create a separator between these. For our overall intensity, we're going to be dealing with the background weight on our ad, so I'm going to right click and export the background weight to our type properties, giving this a name of rim light intense and a label of overall intensity. Drop that into our rim lights folder. And for our diffuse and specular intensities, we're going to be using the foreground and background weight on our screen. The diffuse is wired into the foreground, so the diffuse is going to be our foreground weight. So I'll export our foreground weight and rename this to rim light diff intens. Call this diffuse intensity. Drop that into our rim lights. And finally, we can right click and export our background weight, giving this a name of rim light spec intens, with the label specular intensity. If we then go ahead and drop that into our rim lights folder, we can accept and jump up to see our asset. So on the bleachers, this is going to be our bleachers top, since we have shadows. We can decrease the overall intensity, see those get killed out. Bring that back in. We're not really going to notice shadows since we're dealing with the audience's pass. On the top light, we have overall intensity controls. Sorry, for our bounce light, we have overall intensity control. We can see the red bounce light being affected by that control. For our rim lights, if we come down here, be nice and clear, we have overall intensity control. We also have diffuse intensity control. And it's a few specular highlights. It would probably be hard to see, but we do actually have specular control as well. And finally, down here we can just see our main spotlights. We can enable and disable and control our main spotlights as before. So you can see by reusing previous assets and using them as building blocks for other assets, it's very quick to start building complicated assets that have a lot of parameters in no time at all. So now we've wrapped up our audience, and we can go ahead and start using our audience and our stadium. And I guess we can get shot 1 complete, because they're the only 2 objects in shot 1. So we'll do that in the next video. So thanks a lot.